If you want to see what's going on in general news today, you can Google that, and this is what you'll find. And this is Maura Healey. She's a Massachusetts Attorney General. And she's launching an investigation after the credit reporting company Equifax announced that 143 million Americans, me included, had their information exposed, like their social security numbers and birth dates and address histories and their driver's licenses and things. And that's about it. You won't find this, because this, as we talked about last week, is spot news. This isn't general news. So I want to get into something having to do with general news. It's probably the most popular, the most ubiquitous out there. It's the idea of the press conference. And I know that just does not sound interesting at all, especially from a journalistic standpoint, but I'll bet you Cafe Rio that if you ever become a house photographer for a news organization, or if you freelance out, the first job you're going to get is going to be at a press conference, and you're going to be part of a press corps. And it'll be probably some kind of a local thing, like a city hall meeting or some kind of a police announcement or something, or maybe you'll go corporate and work public relations or something that way. Who knows? But that's where you're going to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the press conference and what that means and the contexts of press conferences. The one that hopefully maybe first comes to your mind is the press conference fiascos we've been experiencing during the 45th administration of the presidency of the United States, especially with this guy, Sean Spicer. Typically, White House press conferences are very orchestrated, they're very controlled, and they're very predictable. And there is a White House Press Association. There are people who have had that beat for decades. And there's a rapport amongst themselves and amongst the press secretaries who serve in the various administrations that go on. This is supposed to be somewhat of the horse's mouth, so to speak, where the news of the country, the news of the administration is not only disseminated through these press conferences, but it's also debated. It's examined. It's from a standpoint of the First Amendment and a free press. It's a place where questions should be answered. We haven't been getting a whole lot of questions answered lately, and not just with this 45th administration. President Barack Obama was pretty adept at going through and not answering questions, or in fact just asking people that he wasn't going to, telling people he wasn't going to take questions. And it goes back to the Clintons and the Bushes, and it's been a long story that way. Nothing's really new here. Well, there is a lot of new here with the 45th administration. In a way, we're sorry to see Sean Spicer go, but in another way, it preserved a free press, at least for now, in terms of what's going on. So there's this political idea, and it happens nationally. It can happen on a state and local levels as well. This is an image of a police chief from Ferguson, Missouri, where he is actually announcing his resignation. And this is a great photograph in terms of shooting a press conference, obviously for a number of reasons, the composition being primary here. You have him middle ground, you have the colors of the American flag that are just a bit foreground as well. And then the out of focus, just barely indicator of the city of Ferguson in the background, their crest, so to speak, there. And him going through and resigning after the fiasco of Michael Brown's shooting and things that had gone on. This photographer, Michael Thomas, created this Getty image here, took all that into consideration contextually. Where was this happening? If we had just a shot of the police chief himself, we might not be able to pull focus on the crest that's on his jacket. And then you have the idea of democracy, maybe represented by the American flag there, or perhaps the pursuit of happiness, those types of themes that go along with such patriotic types of icons. There, the image comes together and does well to tell a story. We had a more recent story. This one having to do with a certain conflict that happened between a Detective Jeff Payne and a nurse, Alex Wubbles, at the University of Utah. If you haven't seen the video by now, get out from underneath your rock and look it up and take a look and see this incredible display of a police officer, a detective, losing his stuff and taking into physical custody a nurse, a healthcare worker, and doing so against the premises of the Constitution that guarantees not only Nurse Wubbles her rights to go through and defend her patient, but the patient's rights as well. So here, this incident happened 5 weeks previous to this press conference that you're seeing here with this image. 5 weeks, which says a lot about the University of Utah Medical Center, says a lot about Nurse Wubbles as well in terms of her holding on to that footage and not releasing it. The reason why she did release it was because no one was talking about it. So once it was released, Mayor Biskupski of Salt Lake City held a press conference. Now, that's her in the foreground there, and in the background is Police Chief Jones. I can't remember his first name. It escapes me right now. This is an image that was published in the Salt Lake Tribune and reporting on this press conference here. And what we're not seeing is the typical press conference fare in terms of all the microphones and the media coverage. This is close up because really as residents of Salt Lake City, or really of a civilized planet, because everybody went just straight up in arms after watching the video. We wanted something that went beyond just the formality of a press conference, at least visually, to represent that. And this photographer, I wish I could pronounce his last name, he goes through and captures that in this compression. He's shooting a long lens. It's a bit off angle, what's called a canted angle, that gives it just a little bit of uncertainty to it. And then the expression of the mayor in the foreground, Mayor Biskupski's face there, even though it's lost in that shallow depth of field, it certainly has some consternation going on there to go through and tell the story. I don't know if you caught it. I did a radio show with Radio West with Doug Fabrizio about this, along with the chief here, and it was fascinating to listen to his explanation and to watch his chief of public affairs, his public relations expert, respond to how he was trying to go through and justify what was going on. And then there are ad hoc press conferences like this one. This is the previous police chief of Salt Lake City who resigned under certain circumstances that were not reflective of his character by any stretch. It was a political move to move him out. But this was an ad hoc, or I'm going to be outside in 15 minutes. If you want to have the story, you better show up, kind of a thing, where he tells his side of the story. City Hall is a great place to go through and see what's going on in terms of press conferences. This one having to do with asserting a certain demographic's rights here in the city of San Francisco. Or how about a city council meeting? Yeah, I would like to have been a fly on this wall to see what's going on. Now, St. George and all the local 5 cities in the area of Washington County all hold regular city council meetings. And if you want to, it's not a bad idea for you as a student, as a photojournalism student, to go and at least sit in on them. They're going to bore you, some of them will, but it'll give you an idea of the protocol of the meeting, the process of what goes on, and how things are decided upon and adjudicated within those meetings there. If you get a proper press credential, or maybe not, you could probably show up with an iPhone and go through perhaps and photograph it, see what's going on. It's all public record as it goes. There are other city and county types of situations, like how about an arraignment hearing? This is a mob boss being arraigned on several charges here. Michael Patrick was able to go through and grab this image of the attorney, and that's the guy in the foreground with the white triangle thing in his breast pocket. I don't know what those are called because I've never worn one myself. But the defendant is right behind him there, It's a great shot, really. It goes through and showing what's going on. Not sure what's going on with the jumpsuits in the background, if they're part of testifying on this arraignment or what. And also bail hearings as well. If it's a high-profile case, we've had several here in St. George, Washington County, Warren Jeffs, a few others as well. That becomes newsworthy when they've been tried and convicted, and then they return back for a bail hearing, or not a bail hearing, a sentencing hearing, or a bail hearing, I guess, as well, to see then what the outcome, what the judge has decided to do. So these are newsworthy events. They're typical press conference types of events. You're not going to be the only photog there. You'll be there with a scribbler perhaps as well to get the story as it unfolds. Maybe in Washington County you will be the only person there. The Spectrum has some pretty active, a very active staff, a couple of which are former students of this very class. They know what's going on. And there are other contexts as well. There's like sports is a great press conference context. We've all seen the most obvious questions asked to the most obvious players after the most obvious playoffs, and we all think we know the answers, but that doesn't seem to keep us from asking those questions to begin with. We had quite a press conference happen here with our latest boxing match going on, and certainly natural disasters are context for press conferences as well. This particular American Sign Language signer on the right has received kind of cult status in terms of his ability to express the urgency of what's going on. This is in South Carolina. There's press conferences in entertainment where we need to shoot a little bit differently in terms of not just one person, but you might have a whole cast and crew sitting up on a stage and to be able to go through and catch the ambiance, the story of what's happening. Or corporate culture, corporate press conferences. Lots of corporations, if they're introducing a new product or they're putting out an initial public offering, whatever the case might be, know how to go through and create press conference or news conference situations that are highly produced. They've got great secondary video going on to go through and express their communication objectives. They have what are called video news releases that are released directly to the media, circumventing you, the photojournalist, to get their message out. They can control that way. And then you have celebrities holding their own press conferences after they might have said something that they wish they hadn't said. Or in her case, she rescinded what she said, and then she came back and said, no, I stand by my actions. She held up a severed head of one Donald Trump in protest to certain things that was going on. So through all these contexts, there's some approaches here maybe that ought to be considered. We've seen a couple of them. One is to, like this shot here, is to get away from the press. In the press conferences I've covered, rarely would I end up in the crowd of the photographers, and I would swing around and try to get, I'm trying to get to an image here like this one, and try to get a full context of the story, because to me this is much more interesting than just the guy standing at the podium. The color, the crowd, the obvious physical context of what's going on. You have cultural, social, psychological, physical, and temporal contexts all happening here within one image with that going on. There was another one here. Let me go through and see. Maybe that was it. Well, we got that, and then the other one we're looking at. So let me pop back through my slides to the other idea. So the one idea is you get out away from the press corps. Okay, get away from the press body of photographers and find a different angle to go through and cover the story. Like this one here, that this person goes back behind the press line to give us context of what's happening there. Tells, I think, a much more interesting story. And obviously, that's not going to be the only pick of the take, right? He's got the stuff, or she has the right frames that she needs to tell the story up close, but then she moves away, he moves away, and is able to go through and get maybe audience reactions, to get maybe their PR person standing next to them who might be fidgeting, their hands, ringing or something along that line, or maybe a certain type of facial response to the news as it goes out. The press corps, as they follow certain predictable individuals around, like this guy, know that once he maybe takes a little bit of a verbal stammer and figures out what he's going to say, because every word he says is going to be audited in some newspaper someplace, when he does so, he raises his left hand and he gestures with it. That's a good time to release the shutter, because we're communicating more here. We have a kinesic element going on, and this element is an illustrator that he's putting up. And if you've watched President Obama enough, you know, or at least you can predict perhaps when these signals are going to happen. With 45, it's a no-brainer with that guy, because he uses the same 3 or 4 gestures every press conference he gets into, and really has the same delivery, the same thing. And that, after a while, gets a little bit on the boring side of things. Another thing to watch for are the expressions, especially if we're in a situation of crisis. And I know that might sound kind of capitalizing on the situation, and it could be, to go through and capture the grieving parent. But it tells a story. It tells of the heartbreak of what's been just announced at that press conference. Or we happen to be looking for a 9-year-old girl, and we need your help. And then we have an image like this snapped of a grieving father, and it amps up the immediacy of the story. This man was at the club in Orlando, Florida, and was a survivor of the mass shooting that happened there. At a press conference, talking about what happened, and you see the stitches, you see the pain and the trauma, you can see the post-traumatic stress going on with this. Does it capitalize on the story, or does it tell the story? So press conferences are a lot more than just somebody standing up in front of a bank of microphones and reading off some statistics or a pre-written kind of delivery of something so they don't have to answer any questions afterwards. It's your job to go through and tell the whole story, not just that of the police chief standing up with a microphone and trying to justify the actions of one of his employees, but to go through and take a look at the expressions that are happening in the background, or the reactions of the people in the audience.